I'm Kaci Patterson.
I'm Felicia Jones.
And this is Thriving While Black, the podcast. Our guest today is Paulette Brown-Hinds. She's the founder and publisher of Voice Media Ventures, which publishes the Black Voice News and houses the Black Voice Foundation. She's also the founder of Mapping Black California, a trustee for the James Irvine Foundation and the Inland Empire Community Foundation, and she curates the Footsteps to Freedom Underground Railroad Study Tour. Felicia, you actually know Paulette pretty well, so tell me how you know our guest today, Paulette.
Yeah, thank you. I got a chance to know of her by way of her family. So she was a little bit of a mystery to me, if I can be honest with you, because I met her brother, Hardy Brown. I got to know her mother because of her leadership in state assembly. And I knew of the Black Voice News. And so, you know, anybody in the Inland Empire certainly has a lot of respect for their family. I didn't get a chance to know her until I got the opportunity to do the Footsteps to Freedom tour. And so I still didn't really know her. I observed her. I was on the tour with her, and I thought, wow, this is a really, she was really quiet, but you could tell that she was like a mover and shaker, somebody that was really important, but was never boastful or arrogant. And so over the years after that, of course, I was a huge fan of the tour, was inspired by the tour, and got to know the family and her work more intimately, and then got a chance to engage with her through the Inland Empire Community Foundation in her role as a board member there. And so just has been a light to the region, a light to Black women, has been just a source of inspiration for me. And I'm just honored to know her and to be in space with her. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I always find so interesting, particularly about the happenings of the Inland Empire, is that there seem to be these family powerhouses that are really instrumental in the region, particularly in the Black community, because it feels like there's a source of inspiration there and a little bit mystique of how did they actually do this in this region, you know? And so I feel like one of our guests, Kareem Webb, also his family sort of fits that same type of mystique and sort of type of real respect, you know, that comes with having that kind of family name and family brand, you know, in the Inland Empire. So I similarly started by knowing of her. And I think it's really interesting because it's one of those things where if you work in philanthropy and there are Black women in philanthropy that are on boards, you know their names. You know who they are because it is so rare to actually hold that level of position of power. And then for her to have chaired the board, I was like, who is this woman? So I started to get to know her work a little bit more, and then actually had the first opportunity to meet her in person when she moderated a panel that I was on at a conference, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. And she's just such a warm, sweet spirit, but you can tell she is purposeful, she is intentional, and she is strategic. Indeed. So I am so happy that she agreed to join us for the podcast today. Please welcome to the show, Paulette Brown-Hinds.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Paulette.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you both.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out to LA.
You know, it's so funny. My husband's, you know, he was not from LA. My husband's originally from Honduras. But he grew up in LA. And so he loves coming out to LA. And I'm always like, that's a long drive. So I'm always going to take the train, Uber, anything where I don't have to drive. But
yeah. It's like driving to and from Vegas.
It really is. It really is.
You got to be committed. You got to be committed to that commute.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for committing to come.
Yes.
Oh, no, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So we're going to get to know you a little bit more.
Okay.
So we sort of know about you. Yeah. We know your work, but we want to know a little bit about you. So we know that your family has, a history in politics, but also a history in media with Black Voice News, and now, of course, your media ventures, projects.
Many projects.
Did you always want to do this? I mean, you all sort of took the reins after your mother and father. Did you see this as part of your journey as a child?
I wasn't going to take over the family business, but I always worked in the family business. So we've had the Black voice in our family since I was in middle school. And, it wasn't started, a lot of people think my family started it, my parents started it, but they actually purchased it. Once it was started by students at UC Riverside in 1972. And then my parents were working as their, kind of community service or civic service with one of the other Black newspapers, the American News. And they had the opportunity to take over, steward of the Black Voice News. And my dad really wanted a family business. And he's always wanted a family business. And so that became our family business. So that was my first job, was like subscription manager. Oh. I have done every job. I mean, I used to deliver papers when I was younger. We used to do mailing, so I'd have to do labels and mail them. Mm-hmm. I wrote for the paper, I was editor. My favorite part, though, was really the business part. I loved working with our advertisers. I loved collecting money when it came. I'll admit, I loved like sending out invoices and money coming in. So that was like my favorite part of the business. But my plan originally was to be a professor. I have a PhD in English literature. My first professional job was as a university professor at the University of Cincinnati. So I finished my PhD, took a job as an assistant professor, left the region for 2 years, and was just drawn back. It was really hard to leave. It was really difficult. Actually, my mother embarrassed me with my chair of my department at the University of Cincinnati. She came to visit me. We had settled in. She came to visit, and she told him she's not going to be here long.
What?
I was like a grown.
Mom said she coming home.
And she's like, wow. And I just looked at her, I'm like, Mom, you can't say that. But it was true. Like I just. She was prophetic. She was. She really was. Let me speak this, And I'll tell you, my parents were really astute with technology early on. And I think in part because it was a way for them to remain connected to me. And like they would send me their articles and have me proofing while I was working in Cincinnati. It was like they were, but I couldn't escape it. I really couldn't escape it.
So you didn't know you were taking over the family business, but they did.
They did. I think think they knew. And we have a couple of entities, and I have a couple of siblings. So we have the nonprofit, and my older sister Lynn. Some people know out in the region, is active like in Rialto in that area in politics. Like Democratic Club. She's, very involved. She leads she's like the chair of the board for our foundation. My dad had started California Black Media, which is the network of all the Black publishers and Black media in California. My younger sister, Regina, runs that and has been doing an amazing job with that. And then Footsteps of Freedom, Felicia, mentioned that she participated in was is something my brother and I do it together. But my brother has really taken the lead and grown it from, one bus a year to, 8,
Wow. Yes. Oh, it's an amazing tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're going to get into that.
Yeah. We'll talk about it. But I know so the newspaper was always something I, was really actively engaged in, but I didn't think I would take over, in part because my parents were very, how should I say this? They held it very close and tight. And my father had health issues, so he couldn't run it anymore. My mother got elected to state assembly, and she couldn't run it anymore. And I had been running the business side, but then had to take over on the editorial side as well when she took that position in Sacramento.
Wow. So it sounds like you got a way to, well, clearly you were forced into it, but you made something of it because you have really evolved the ventures into multiple things. Yes. So it's educational, it's storytelling, it's it's multiple, and it's data. Yeah. You're doing data. Yeah. So how are you, how did you see the integration of all that into a way to actually tell stories about Black folks in California? Like, talk about that journey.
Yeah, so the community news, growing up with a community newspaper, a lot of the coverage is community focused. We're covering, and we're still struggling, I'll admit, we're still struggling with how to balance some of the more investigative and data-driven work we do. Doing that work, you talk about long-form storytelling. It takes a lot to do that kind of work. So we're still balancing that with what some of the community wants are. I mean, community needs and community wants, and so the community would like for us to be at all their events. The community would like for us to cover the botillion or the event that they're having, on a Saturday afternoon, and so we're trying to do both. But when I took over the paper, I really started looking at some of the kind of new technologies, but also some of the things that we weren't, as a community paper and community papers in general, weren't able to do that now you could do with new technology. Right? Before, to have a data journalist or to have a data analyst, you had to be a big news organization, right? And I was introduced to geographic information systems, which is the GIS technology, through one of the founders of the largest GIS company in the world. Actually, it's the global leader in GIS tech, based right in the Inland Empire, which I'm proud of, in Redlands, California. Jack Dangerman. I met Jack and Laura Dangerman. They're the founders of Esri. And I was just we started doing something very actually simple with the technology. We had an opportunity to write a story, and we didn't know what it was going to look like, about African Americans' connection to the coast of California. And it was really through a grant. And the grant was trying to really surface stories about Black Californians and the coast. And my mother actually suggested us writing a piece about the historic segregated Black beaches of California.
Oh, interesting.
So that was fun for us, right? It goes back to that kind of history. And so we were really excited about it. And one of our, because we had been talking about Esri, one of our staff members' wife worked for Esri, said, why don't you do a map of this as well? So we ended up doing a story map, and you can kind of follow along the coastline of California the stories of these segregated beaches, including Bruce's Beach was one of the ones we covered, quite a while ago. And that was one of the first things we worked on. So this was back in 2016. About 2016. So we then just got really excited about the technology. We did another map of our tours, the study tours. And then I went to one of their, Esri has these huge user conferences, like 20,000 people at these conferences. And then they have these smaller ones. I went to one of the smaller ones and sat in on a workshop on their Geo Hub, they called it. They were actually developing it with the city of LA. And it was a way for residents in LA to identify problems that they see in their community, and then to access data about it, to kind of create community around solutions. And I was like, this is what a community paper, if you think about what a community paper does, this is what it would do in a digital space. This is the technology that you have. So I got just super excited about it. And then we just kind of went kind of all in on data journalism. And so that's how we developed Mapping Black California.
Yeah, so I want to talk about Mapping Black California because that, I think, for me, was really my introduction to this idea of data journalism and what data journalism could produce in terms of visibilizing communities. And I remember being at a philanthropic convening in the Inland Empire, and your team presented this data about philanthropic investment in the region. And I'm telling you, we have used that data in reports, in pitches to funders, and all kinds of things. So it has been really, I think, pioneering in how you all have been able to give a visibility to not just investment, but where communities are and what that actually looks like. So tell us a little bit about Mapping Black California.
Yeah, well, that's, like I said, it started with just learning a little bit about GIS technology, and I started learning about community mapping. So as an academic, as someone who, has this background in scholarship and academia, I'm always like, okay, interested in this, but what does it look like? So I got excited about community mapping, the idea of community mapping and all of the different sectors that you bring together when you talk about a community mapping project. So you'll bring together nonprofits, you'll bring together academia, you'll bring together other education, K through 12, and and then media, of course, for us. So I brought together a group to meet at Esri, and this is before we called it Mapping Black California. I was like, I don't know what this is going to be, and we just started talking about like ways that we could utilize the technology. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the problems we're seeing? How can this kind of technology and these ideas around community mapping solve some of these problems and address some of the problems? And we were lucky. We had the head of Cal State San Bernardino, Tomas Morales, came. His provost now, Rafiq Muhammad, was there. We had the Community Foundation. Actually, I created a fund at the Community Foundation. It's the Mapping Black California Fund to just direct some resources there. And we had nonprofits like Society of Extraordinary Women, which has Ignite Leadership Academy, which now teaches GIS and journalism to Black girls. So that's a whole other thing we're doing that we don't talk a lot about. And we had our team. Dina Walker was there too, and Blue, and just a few others. And we just started to think about like what could storytelling look like, what and what ways can we look at like pipeline development. For us is a big issue. So that was why we had some of the groups like Ignite there, and so that's how it just kind of started. We didn't know what it was going to be. Our first big project was the 2020 census. That was like the first really big project, and that's when I finally was able to hire Candace Mays, who's now our project director, because we had a contract for the census. And one of our first things we did was we created our own kind of hard to count map, and we used that in some of the strategies regarding comms around making sure that we're participating in the census as Black Californians. And then from there, we were listening more to Black-led organizations. So, oftentimes there's kind of a conflict, I believe, with like Black media, Black press, and Black-led organizations. There can be a conflict sometimes. And so we were like listening. It was a part of the listening work. We actually did listening sessions. And we were like, what are some of the needs? And we were hearing that, there was a need to be able to understand and access data. And we were like, okay, that's something we could do. And then we were fortunate, like, right, I shouldn't say fortunate, at 2020, you had, the murder of George Floyd.
I know.
Right. So you had certain commitments being made to Black-led organizations.
Right.
And you had, the pandemic happening at the same time. We had the census happening at the same time. I mean, it was just a lot happening.
A crisis of convergence.
That's right.
And so we were in the position where we were able to get funding that we hadn't been able to get prior to that.
A lot of Black orgs found themselves in that position.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we were able to then make some hires. So Alex Reed is one that we were able to make. She's one of the ones that presented. Alex is, and it's interesting, Alex she didn't have a GIS background. None of us do. Candace was an educator and a storyteller. Candace has an MFA in fiction writing, and she wanted to tell stories, and she has an education. She had been a teacher for many years in New York, but she's from Moreno Valley. And then Alex Reed, her background is like theater and technology. So she went to Carnegie Mellon and went to this program where there was like the computer science and theater combined. And so she did some things with technology, and she could build out websites, but not a GIS background. So we've all learned how to use the technology. But we brought in Alex, and I was like, can you learn? Do you want to learn, actually? Do you want to learn GIS? And she's like, yes. So great thing about Esri is all these trainings. So we have then a nice team, and we really started thinking about what could Mapping Black California do. And that's where this work with Black-led organizations kind of developed. Yeah. As we heard from leaders that, one thing we would love is a resource. And so that's really where we've really started, and our work has kind of led us to. And then we support our newsroom, of course. Yeah. The work of the newsroom is the other part of the work we do.
What do you think are the stories about Black communities, particularly in the Inland Empire, that are most misunderstood or most misrepresented?
Oh, gosh. I think there's so much that we just don't even cover. There's just been no coverage. Right now, some of the stories we're telling, we just got an email about this caregiving. We're doing a caregiving series. And one of the issues was that we're just not talking about. We're just not talking about it. And what is that? How's that impacting Black families? The crisis in caregiving, the aging population, and so we're doing a whole series all year. And one of the stories is on couple, two women, partners out in the Palm Springs area, aging, wanting to age at home. But
that's a big thing in our community.
I know, right? I mean, we're taking care of my mother-in-law. She's at my house, and my husband and I. Our son's out the house. He's 30. Actually, he's out of the country right now. But we're managing, taking care of his mother. See my mother. Taking care of my father. Our editor Stephanie, her partner Sandy just died, and she was taking care of her. So we were looking at that like, we're not even talking about this, and what is it doing, and what are some of the resources that maybe are there that we don't know about. So that's the other thing that we try to do with the work we're doing. It's like a solutions framing on all of the work. There's just so many stories that we're not addressing just because there's a crisis in local news. So and then even before the crisis, you didn't have mainstream news organizations even talking about it.
Well, one of the narratives that I know gets lifted up a lot about Black California is our dwindling numbers.
Yeah.
And usually what that comes with is a narrative about our statistical insignificance.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious what that narrative doesn't include is it does not talk about our power.
Right.
And despite our dwindling numbers, our power as a community to influence public consciousness, to influence public policy, remains as strong as ever, and in some ways is even stronger than it used to be because we have networked organizations now in a way that we didn't before. So I'm curious if you could talk about that a little bit. What have you seen in terms of the difference between the mainstream narrative and what's really true about Black communities?
Well, I think one thing, like the numbers, for instance, we actually are, when we look at, in the last 20 years, we have more Blacks here in California. Where our percentage of population is lower, right? So, but we still.
Oh, so that's interesting. Yeah. So our numbers are higher, but the percentage is lower.
So when you look at the census, the census before last, we like 2 million. Now we're like 2.8. Okay. So our last census we're like at 2.8. So there are more of us, but the population in general has grown. And so our percentage is lower. But what's interesting about, I think, the story of Black populations in California is the movement of Black populations, right?
That's right.
So the numbers may be lower in places that were, historically are, community
like
centers.
Cultural epicenters.
Right, like Inglewood, where we're sitting right now, right in Inglewood. When you look at the numbers, even in Los Angeles, when you look at the Bay Area, places, in Oakland, San Francisco. But now there's this movement out to the inland regions, or, so you'll see a larger Black population growing in like high desert.
That's right.
In where, Banning Beaumont,
yes,
exactly. Moreno Valley, places like that. And then up in Northern California, actually was just hearing a statistic about the largest growth of the Black population is in like Vallejo, so Solano County, city of Vallejo. So people moving out, it's more affordable. The challenges though with that are that you don't have the infrastructure, and that especially the kind of the social support, but you don't have that kind of community infrastructure that you had. But what I'm seeing, and I think the work that you're doing, that the two of you are doing in bridging those communities, right? So you're not just, you're like Inland Empire, LA, and you're bridging those, so that I think that power that you're talking about, we can see more and more of that developing in those newer communities where our populations are kind of shifting.
Yeah. And part of the reason why we did that is because we recognized that though Black folks were moving out to the Inland Empire, a lot of them were still going to church in LA.
That's right.
They would still be commuting into
LA for
work, getting their hair done in LA,
yeah.
coming to see family on the weekends. And so even though they were living in different places, there really was an integration of these two regions in a way that we felt, well, we should try to support that integration and actually connect that integration in a more meaningful way. So I appreciate you saying that, because it is something that we have seen in our work and have tried to address in helping to provide more of that sort of social support for folks out in the IE, up in the Antelope Valley, these areas where the populations are increasing in terms of Black folks, but we're trying to help and get the sort of social supports to follow the population booms.
Right. And I think part of the challenge too is in the resource support, the philanthropic support, right? So we talked about LA, well, the coast, gets more in philanthropic support. LA still doesn't get as much as the Bay Area. The Bay Area still, gets outsized amount of philanthropic support. But inland, like the Inland Empire, Central Valley, places like that are getting, pennies on the dollar when it comes to the philanthropic support.
Well, that's one of the things that Mapping Black California visibilized that was so stark, is that when you combine what LA and the Inland Empire is getting together, it's still less than half of what the Bay Area gets per capita. That was shocking. I know. It was shocking to see the data that you all pulled together.
Well, and I think that's what's great about, using maps too, and the visualizations that you can use with maps. I mean, I really, it helps you better understand the problem and, actually what kind of opportunities for solutions there are. I'll tell you, when we first started, we had Candace and Alex now on board, and we started that Black-led, the BLO database. So we have so we started, but it started with actually Trisha Muse at SoCal Gas wanted us in 2020 to look at where they were where they were currently giving, like what their giving looked like to Black-led organizations in their service territory. And so that's really all she wanted. And then Alex on our team was like, let me do some overlaying of like Black population.
Yeah.
And then let's look at some of the COVID impacts, because at that point, the pandemic we were, well into the first year of the pandemic. And so Patricia used it to really look at, where should we, they were giving a little more in LA, less in the IE, and the population that kind of shifted. That was one thing. But then also they were giving to specific things. And they were like, well, there's other needs. And so she was able to use the data to look at, some of the other needs. And some of the Black organizations in the Inland Empire were able to get funding from them. And it wasn't huge amounts, but some for the first time.
Yeah, that's really significant.
And for us, it became I think it was a little light bulb moment too. So that's when we were like, okay, let's get this. Let's look at what does it look like across the state. And so we started just we found out how difficult it was to find all of the Black-led organizations. And so there was, a group, I think it's through East Bay Community Foundation.
Yeah. Byron's work.
They had a list. We were really working Southern California. We kept building, Southern California list. I think partnering with, folks like, that was helpful. And then Central Valley was a challenge. We were, we were still. I don't know if we're still good with where we are in Central Valley, but we started
getting there.
We were working with the Explosive Community Foundation there, and so we started like just kind of collecting all of this information, and we're like, okay, we need to map this out, and so that became one of what we call our flagship projects, and it's been that. Other challenges that we've identified as we've been doing this work is we don't have a list of like fiscally sponsored programs. And you know how many there are.
We can talk after the podcast about that, because the Black Equity Collective is doing a big project around fiscally sponsored projects. So we can definitely pick that conversation up.
There are a lot of organizations that they're doing great work, but we just don't have them on the list. So I would love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, we will definitely pick that conversation up.
We can't wait to talk. So you've been doing, clearly you've been doing a lot of innovative work, but you've started something new called the Journalism Innovation Hub and Fund. So tell us a little bit more about that. I'm curious to know how you're weaving all of these things into this hub.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. And I'm always starting stuff.
You are.
It's so funny.
I feel you on that.
Right? Yes, I do try. Yeah, and you're starting a big thing. You're getting to chair a big thing.
Yes.
I won't say what, but
we'll talk about that with one of our guests next week.
Yes, I heard all about it and excited.
Yes.
Very excited. And congratulations.
You so much. Thank you.
The hub. So how did that start? I was a fellow at Stanford for 2 years, and that was amazing opportunity for me to kind of. The first year was during the pandemic, so it was virtual, it was remote. Second year, they allowed me to be a senior fellow, and I was going up to Stanford every month, and I just building relationships with different programs that, folks that I found there. We became a Starling Lab fellow and doing some work on Web3 technology. And, that actually one of our other flagship projects is built on a Web3 platform.
What is Web3?
It is the distributed web. It is the way we'll probably be experiencing the internet in the future. And
you just spoke a whole foreign language.
I know.
The distributed web. What is that?
We were talking about. It reminds me kind of like I would say like kind of the Uber or the Airbnb of like what of web.
Oh, interesting.
Where private computers will host the data, and it'd be a distributed.
Scary.
I know. Yeah.
But so did Uber and Airbnb.
Exactly.
Like, you're actually going to get in some stranger's car that you don't know?
Well, and it's built on blockchain. And I know the words, but it's built on blockchain technology, and it uses cryptology. So what saves you is that only people with that code can access information.
We're going to have a whole glossary of terms with this episode.
Yeah.
This is why it's called the innovation.
Yeah. So, so you're registering. So we actually, all of our, in our Racism as a Public Health Crisis dashboard, all of our digital assets are registered on blockchain. And it makes it so it's permanent. You can't change it. We talk about what's happening with artificial intelligence and how you can manipulate digital assets, right? And so you're looking at somebody's face. It's a person you recognize, right? They're talking and you think they're talking, but it's not. It's a manufactured voice, right? And it looks like they're actually talking. So it's a way of what we call creating this more authenticated, Candace likes to talk about kind of notarized version of things.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's the way she likes to use the notary because people understand
that.
Yeah.
I'm actually really glad to hear this because one of my biggest fears about AI is that it is the next wave of mass incarceration.
Oh yeah, people are very worried
because
about that.
To manipulate someone's image and voice and put them in places where they were not, it's really scary, to think about the impact that could have on communities of color in particular. And just to pick up on what's going on with the Innovation Hub, I think one of the things that we're seeing overall in the sector, particularly as newsrooms are closing, laying off staff, that there's really this sort of crisis in journalism. Right. Philanthropy is stepping in, to pick up the slack of advertising dollars that have gone away and to help create these sort of consortiums where there's economies of scale and, things of that nature that actually are helping media, which is often called, sort of the fourth part of democracy,
the fourth estate.
Sort of helping media to be strong and to not actually disappear in this age of disinformation and misinformation. Right. And I'm curious, when you think about from where you sit as a trustee on foundation boards, I'm curious how you think about the investments of philanthropy in media and why do funders see those as critical investments?
Right. Well, an informed, community-informed society is like the foundation of democracy. Mm-hmm. So we always talk about that in the philanthropic circles, or I would say more specifically in the journalism philanthropic circles of, whatever your first issue is, your second should be funding local journalism because you need people to be informed. Mm-hmm. So actually I could bring together both the questions you have around our hub and around philanthropy. So one of the newest kind of directions that philanthropy has taken is in supporting ecosystem development.
Yes, that's right.
Right. And so I'm actually a part of a democracy fund supports ecosystem leaders. And so they gave me a coach. I was so when I was at Stanford working, I was really thinking a lot about community philanthropy and journalism, in part because I'm on the James Irvine Foundation board, and we do support some journalism. I'm on the Inland Empire Community Foundation board, and community foundations are really stepping up across the country in supporting local journalism because they see the problems on the ground, right? Just with the crisis in journalism, the things that you see in a community, the polarization increases. You have the cost of local government, which becomes a taxpayer cost, those increase. And so all of this is kind of proven research on what's happened with the crisis in local journalism. So philanthropy is stepping up. You are seeing support of individual newsrooms, but you really see this kind of ecosystem approach. So that's one of the reasons I launched the hub in the Inland Empire. I was already seeing it across the country, and I actually a couple years ago, I didn't author. I funded a guidebook on community foundations and media and how media community foundations can come together.
Oh, wow.
Right, and raise local funding to support journalism.
Like a blueprint.
It's like a
almost.
blueprint, yeah. So it was a guidebook that I thought about, and so that became my second year project at Stanford. And as a board member, former chair of my community foundation board, my CEO, Michelle Decker, is like, Paulette, you can't be talking about all this and not doing it here, right? So when we created our signature funds, we have our 80th anniversary at the Community Foundation. We had 8 signature funds. So journalism became one of those. I became the leader of that fund. And then Irvine stepped up and, gave us our first $500,000 to just start to think about what the hub part of the fund could look like. Because we didn't want to just put money in a fund. And actually, I don't think you can even attract money in the fund if you're not talking about innovation and how are we fixing the problem. Mm-hmm. We don't want to just give money to the same thing that's not working. So how do we innovate? And that's what's been exciting to me is just even in our launch in June, we started our launch at Esri. So Esri is, because I'm like I said, I'm like, Jack, we need, you're the major technology company in our region. You're a global leader in this, and they've done some things on like mapping the news, and like I said, their technology is great for storytelling. And so we launched at Esri, and I was in a conversation with Dean Baquet, who's the first Black executive editor at the New York Times, first Black executive editor at the LA Times. But because of the New York Times, I would say of media outlets, news media outlets has figured it out. Not that that model works for everyone. I think there'll be a lot of different models. But I wanted to hear from him, and I think people respect him too. So I thought, it would be great to have Dean kind of kick this off. And he's actually an LA resident now, that he's retired from executive editor, but he's also running a fellowship program, and he's seeing things all over the country. So in our conversation, we talked about what are you seeing that's exciting about what's happening in local news. And one of the things he talked about was this real engagement with community. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing that our hub is built on. We're having town halls, we're listening to community, we're really partnering with our CBOs in the region. Mm-hmm. So because we're housed at the Community Foundation, it's been, great to kind of partner with them. So our second event was on policy and some of the public policies that we're seeing being pushed to support local journalism. Everyone recognizes the crisis now. And so you have at all levels support. So philanthropy is one area, but government, is trying to figure out how to support local journalism.
Because disinformation hurts them too.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does.
Absolutely.
And, with the new technologies, we talk about the opportunities for you to spread bad information or lies. And so we see the disinformation that really worries me, especially with our community, because we can become targets.
That's right. And we do.
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
And so the challenge is in media literacy, which is, I think, the other piece of it. And even on our hub, we're like, okay, what are we doing on the media literacy side? How do we partner with school districts, so that people can identify what is real and what is not? Great examples what's happening right now with this Haitian immigrant.
Oh, my gosh.
Right?
Yes.
And having the major candidate of a political party spreading lies that spreading them and then doubling down on it.
That has real harmful physical
impacts.
Harmful impacts on community.
Yeah, and then when you see how people are sharing, images that aren't really it's not the image, and there's one in particular of a Black man walking down the street with geese or something, and they're like, see, it wasn't an image. So once you look at the metadata of that image, once you find out where that image is actually from, he wasn't in Springfield. He wasn't, and then when you find out the story, these were actually geese in Columbus that had been hit by cars. But, sometimes you have those ponds.
Yeah.
And they had been hit by cars, and he was taking them actually to like to the either the wildlife or some office that was like, but it wasn't this, but it became a different headline.
Right. It wasn't the actual
It wasn't
story.
the actual story.
Yeah.
And so that's a
manipulation.
That's a problem.
Yeah. But to your point, I think I have seen a rise in community engaged news, and I think that is a positive outcome of the decline of newsrooms, is that there is more intentionality around engaging community folks who are on the ground, really listening and getting news from community, So I think that's been a real benefit if you can sort of silver lining, what's been happening.
What's interesting, Kaci, is when I'm talking locally to people about the hub, and part of the strategy now, there's this big effort, Press Forward.
Yes.
Press Forward is a national effort to bring $500 million into local news, and led by MacArthur and Knight Foundation, and they've launched these kind of local chapters. So our hub is actually the Inland Empire, is the local Press Forward chapter.
Okay.
And there's now 3 in California. We were one of the first 2, us in Central Valley, and then Silicon Valley Community Foundation just launched this week. There are 3 of us. But part of that is work is then to get local donors to support these regional funds. And in some cases, we have people walking in. I'm going to be speaking in Modesto and in about a month. And I've talked to a few other community foundations where they've just had donors walk in the door, not solicited, with like, I see the crisis, there's a problem, here's money, like $500,000. We've seen it at our local college, Cal State San Bernardino, where they had a donor, unsolicited, it was like $750,000 for investigative.
Where them donors at?
I know, right? I know. So that's one of the things, right? We're trying to cultivate that at the Community Foundation. What's interesting about this idea of community engaged journalism, which is good. Like, there are new things that are happening that are good, is sometimes when I talk to people and they kind of go back to like, it's kind of the good old days of news, the LA Times or the, for us out there, the Press Enterprise. And I'm like, we don't want to go back to that because that really harmed
That's right.
certain communities. So there's an education that we have to do now also, that this is journalism and this is good journalism. The old way wasn't necessarily the best for all communities. And so that becomes a part of the work we have to do, especially when we look at who some of those donors might be.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So we have to kind of educate them. We have to educate, young people with media literacy and what they should and shouldn't share, and how they should recognize a true media source versus propaganda.
That's good.
But there's so much that that we have to do.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question of personal interest to me.
Yes.
I mentioned in my introduction that when there is a Black woman who sits on a foundation board, you know who she is. And if you don't, you find out very quickly, who is this Black woman? And I'm really interested in how we can get more Black women to sit in these positions of power and influence, and how do we support them once they get there?
Yeah. Those are great questions. I actually chair the committee on the board for Irvine. And, I learned through the work I did I was development chair on the Inland Empire Community Foundation board. And I remember actually kind of asking, the chair of the board makes that selection, who's chairing committees. Okay. And the chair at the time was going to give it to somebody else. And one of the staff members is like, no, like, Paulette, tell him you want it. I'm like, okay, I want it. And I realized when I took that position as the board development chair at the Community Foundation, just how significant that position is to the makeup of your board. Because that's really the committee that works on new board members and what we should be looking for. And so if you look at the Community Foundation, now it is very different than when I started. And I'm very proud of the diversity of that board. And we were very intentional. And, part of, for me, like, people ask me because they're very interested in something like Irvine. How do you get on a board like Irvine? And, we identify people who are on other boards, right? Especially, at the community level, you start to see folks who are on boards. And so I've actually been able to attract some good board members for the Community Foundation board. Just say, look, this is a way to get your start. And we've had, some young folks who've come in. If you look at like the Cielo Fund, like Jesse, he was like, I want to do what you're doing. I'm really, but I don't know anything about philanthropy. And I'm like, well, let's start with the Community Foundation, right? And he's learning, and I mean, he's built that, in 2 years. It's like $2 million. They've really done some great work. So I think part of it is knowing how board members are selected, and then being in positions, especially when we look at some of the larger foundation boards, we're always, building like a board book of like, potential candidates. And you start to look at people you've served with, or people who you have had an opportunity to see in a setting. As an example, we just recently announced Sherry Dunbarry.
Oh,
I saw that. Yeah,
yes.
I saw that.
Oh.
Yes, actually, if you look at our two newest board members, the Irvine Foundation, we have two really stellar African Americans who are now on the board, and Sherry was on our Leadership Awards Committee.
That's right.
Board.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there are strategic pipelines.
Yeah. There
are. Getting in positions on like funds within the foundation and sort of gaining some experience that way, looking at review committees that sort of exist within these foundations, and having people get to know you, in that capacity, and you also getting to know how the foundation works,
right.
And getting and then being in a position of power to be in a role where you actually get to choose or help the foundation to choose who you're looking at, to be able to be
and
on the
making
board.
The case.
It's important.
I'll tell you, I was on the Community Foundation board, and Jane Carney was terming off of Irvine's board. So she was the first person from our region on the Irvine board. They had never had anyone from the Inland Empire. So as they started looking at, Jane started looking at leaving. She was like, I want to make some recommendations because I want to make sure there's somebody from the Inland Empire on the board. Now I've known her for a long time, but seeing me in a leadership role at the Community Foundation, I think helped, make the case. And so I always, recommend, especially I am very fond of the work community foundations do, and I think that's just a great kind of starter for people to be introduced to philanthropy. And so I'm always encouraging that. And there's just so much you can do. I just think there's so much opportunities and we've seen it at the Inland Empire Community Foundation for people to have a passion about something. I started our Women's Giving Fund, and I was excited about it, but Nefertiti Long is even more excited than I am. So she is doing an amazing job of growing that fund.
And she chairs the board now.
She chairs the board. Yeah. We had three black women actually.
It's
amazing.
It's a diverse board. And
yes.
Looking more like us.
Yeah.
So we so just appreciate this conversation. The podcast is called Thriving While Black, and so we have to hear from you. When you think about thriving while Black, what are the images and possibilities that come to mind for you?
When I think about that, I think about my family. I think going back to the conversation around, the work that my parents and the rest of us are now really engaged in. I think all of the family, including our, who we marry.
Yes.
I was talking to somebody recently. They had no idea that my brother-in-law runs WRCOG, which is like the Western County region of governments. And it was the guy's talking to me. He had like no idea, so he said, "We're gonna have Kurt Wilson come." And I looked at him. I said, "Do I need to text him?" I said, "He's married to my sister." And the guy just looked at me like I had no idea, And the work my husband does as a professor and a playwright, Paulette Brown-Hinds, is just amazing. And once again, even my sister-in-law, Sonietta, is like chair of the symphony board in San Bernardino. Like it's like I think our family. I can't wait to see what the next generation does. But when I think of thriving in my family, I think of opportunities and access, and I think of why we were even in California. My grandfather, my mother's father, was in Pittsburgh, and he really was like, California is the place to be. This was in the 1950s, and he was just like, opportunity. There's so much opportunity there. And he leaves, the whole family comes here. And my grandfather ended up with his tax business, actually here in L.A., on, I think it's on Martin Luther King. It's been there for over 60 years.
Wow.
It's, Mentor and Sons, my uncles now run it. And I look at my uncle, because of that move, my uncle is now, he owns lots of property in West LA. My mother, has done all that she's done. And the big part of it is that my grandfather saw this place, that there could be opportunities that he didn't have in Pittsburgh. And the same with my father, who came when he was right after high school. He came with his brother to California and from North Carolina. My dad was a sharecropper. My grandparents were sharecroppers. He, didn't finish, high school, but they were there. They were the folks registering people to vote, involved in the NAACP, the Masons, Eastern Star. They were just really civically active. And so my father came here. Same thing. It was like there's opportunity, and I think when I think of opportunities to thrive, I think that's part of the challenge in some of our communities is people don't have access to the things they need. We go back to as media information, access to information that can help them. I mean, there's like so much out there, and sometimes you just don't know, and there's more and more noise and trash thrown at us so that we don't even have the information we need, right? So I think that opportunities and access can provide the real opportunities for thriving. The images I see are, people who have all that they want and need. I don't know,
It's beautiful.
When you think of that,
That's beautiful.
And too many of our families, unfortunately, don't.
Yeah.
So,
To me, it's an image of joy and peace. Yeah. And I think for the work that you are doing and have been leading on so many fronts, from Footsteps to mapping Black California to publishing to the work that you're doing on the foundation boards and establishing the hub, I think you are being deliberate about making sure that Black folks have access to information and access to resources that will help them to thrive. So thank you for that.
No,
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. You are innovating and already paving a beautiful way for Black folks. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it.
Yes,
Before
indeed.
we let you go, we do something.
Okay.
You don't have to think too hard.
Okay.
This is
First comes to mind.
first things come to mind. This is rapid fire.
Okay.
So for the culture, we do this for the culture.
Okay, all right.
All right.
All right.
So tell us very quickly, best thing about living in the Inland Empire.
Oh my God. The people.
The people. Yeah.
The people. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I love being surrounded by mountains. I love our landscape. Me too. I do. I love it. It like anchors me. Anyway, so
the people and the landscape.
And the landscape.
Okay. What's your go-to dessert?
Oh, my favorite is chocolate. Anything chocolate. Anything chocolate. I love chocolate. Actually, yes, chocolate.
Chocolate is always a mood lifter.
That's right.
Always a mood lifter. Okay, are you a 7-day cruise or 7-day safari kind of person?
Okay, I've never been on a cruise.
Really?
Oh. I would tell you, my mother gave me a cruise for one of my birthdays, and I didn't go. I do want to do a river cruise.
Okay.
Why are you afraid of cruises?
No,
are you afraid of the boats?
No. And
is it the Footsteps of Freedom tour?
That's what I so
did that underground. You're like, look, I'm not getting on that
boat.
ship.
No, I don't know.
Nothing good happens for Black people.
I know. No, I do want to do a river cruise, and then I'll say this: my son, who's now he's in and out of Botswana, and I want to go because I can do like safari or something down.
So safari is where you're leaning.
I really want to do that, but I may do a river cruise before I do that.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Well, favorite way to unwind or have some limitless fun.
Oh gosh, I just did a spa day with Nefertiti and I. We went to and we did 2 nights so that we didn't have to like even think we were at spa all day. So we spent the night, went to the spa all day, and I had all kinds of treatments. That would be my favorite thing to do. And then had a really nice dinner that night after.
Yeah, that does sound amazing, actually.
It was so nice.
Yes.
Okay, 2 more. I'm going to ask your husband to turn his ears down.
Okay.
Your celebrity crush.
Oh, my God. Probably Idris.
Oh, he's a favorite. He's a fan favorite.
It's just, there's so much about him that I like. So my husband knows that, so it's okay.
Okay,
I think it might be his
husband know that.
It might be his crush in a way. Like if he had a man crush, it would be. So we're okay.
Yeah. That's so funny. That's so funny. Okay, all right. Last one. Oprah or Gayle?
Oprah.
Oprah.
Oprah. I don't know. I mean, I like Gayle. I've been watching some of her, but I think Oprah's the original.
Yeah, she's the OG. The OG.
I love that, though. That's a good question.
Well, Paulette, thank you so much for being here. You really are just doing phenomenal work, and we're so grateful that you would join us on this podcast, Thriving While Black. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. In our next episode, we feature the leadership of social good solutions and hear how 3 Black women have shaped their leadership journey together. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Thriving While Black, the podcast.